I know, right? It's a really bold statement to make. The man responsible for dreadlocks and hip hop culture. I mean, my hair is trying to give it away. I'm trying to give you a clue just by my hairstyle alone, which I think is pretty cool. However, you have a list of about 2, 3, maybe 4, 5 rappers in your head that you're thinking of right now. And I'm gonna have to burst your bubble if it isn't Busta Rhymes. Again, listen, we have many different people who have styled their hair in this way in hip hop culture. But when we look back at the 70s and 80s, there isn't much representation of dreadlock styles. Yes, it's big in American culture, in Black American culture. But in regards to hip hop culture, we don't see much rappers doing it until the early 90s when he signed his deal and we get to see him styling his hair this way. On top of all of that, I get to speak to David Corio, a famous British photographer who captured hip hop during the essence, during the late 80s when hip hop was really starting to become the mainstream player when it comes to music, especially in Black America.
You know, major names that have a Caribbean sort of background. I know Dougie Fresh does, Busta Rhymes. So it's obviously in their upbringing, probably before they were really into hip hop, they were, you know, getting infused with, you know, that sort of style.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
He captured Big Daddy Kane, MC Shan, Biz Markie, you name it, the list goes on. So I'm going to speak to someone who was actually there and who can actually, you know, agree with me on my claim that Busta Rhymes is one of the most important, credible people when it comes to influencing dreadlock and hip hop culture. But before I give Busta Rhymes his flowers, we must paint the full picture and the full landscape of what rap looked like in the 70s when it was first birthed.
It sound right, boy.
Now, with the assassination of Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement would come to an end in 1968, I believe. Now, what would be birthed shortly after in a few years? Hip-hop culture in 1973. What's important to note is that the effect of the civil rights movement was not gone anywhere. We had activists and hip-hop artists all coming together to speak and preach about the discrimination of Black people during that time period. We had acts like KRS-One, Public Enemy, the like, you name it, all speaking about the issues. What also became prevalent and what also became very apparent during that time period was the Afro hair becoming a symbolic stature of Black pride and Black unity, which is why we had athletes, actors, rappers alike, you name it, all sporting the Afro hairstyle. I'm talking about Dr. J, I'm talking about Pam Grier, I'm talking about the Jackson 5s, you name it. If you look at any image of the 70s of Black America, you're more likely to see that Afro hair. It was a signal of Black pride. Why is that important in this journey? Because it proves that the dreadlock hairstyle is not a popular style within that time period. It is an Afro-frenzy period. Now, transitioning away from the 1970s period, let's move a decade forward, 1983. One of the most significant interviews is done by David Bowie, criticizing MTV for the lack of creative talent. Now, it was evident and clear that Black creators were growing. Hip-hop culture in the 80s was beginning to form an identity. Still very young in the culture, but still something making noise within the mainstream media. What did David Bowie do? Call out MTV for the lack of creative talent, which would then result into Michael Jackson premiering his favorite, one of his most trademark songs, Billie Jean, which would then lead to, by the end of the decade, having an uproar of Black talent within the platform. 1988, your MTV Raps is born. We have a real hip-hop show that's showing the innovative, stylistic hip-hop artists of the generation. What's really important to realize is that this would be the decade to set the blueprint for the 90s golden era, but it was the 80s, it was the artists of that decade using the platform to showcase what was happening in the street. Now, if you take a look at what's happening in the show, there isn't much representation of dreadlocks. Can you imagine if Yo MTV Raps was born today with the domination of Southern artists from Lil Wayne, 2 Chainz, Gunna, Young Thug? It'd be dreadlock central, but it's the 80s. We're seeing the flat top, we're seeing Jerry curls, we're seeing rope chains, we're seeing 4-finger rings, we're seeing all of these styles that are predominantly the mainstream stylistic trend of that era. Then the 90s comes. What happens then? Now, the 90s is about being different, it's about being creative, it's about being stylistic, it's about being animated, which we can all say Busta Rhymes was. I mean, who's going row, row, like a dungeon drag? That lyric is so embedded in our hearts and in our minds as one of the most iconic sound bites from an artist. Busta Rhymes does all of that, but he uses his hair to express who he is as a person. I mean, yes, we have the animated videos to come, as in Dangerous and Put Your Hands on My Eyes, can see in the late 90s, but towards the mid and the early 90s, we get to see him building his character. A lot of this is done through his hair.
Did you see a common theme in regards to what the hairstyle was during the time? Was it the flat top, buzz cuts? Because my claim is that Busta Rhymes was one of the first people to style his hair that way. So if you look at all your pictures, it seems like it was the buzz cut or the flat tops. But yeah, let me know what you think.
I mean, I really started shooting hip hop, probably mid 80s. I mean, like early people. I mean, Will Smith, Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. They were very clean cut. It was very sort of neat and sort of styled, and then, I think Busta Rhymes was probably the first that I really noticed, sort of locking up.
Now, what's interesting is he was captured in a photo shoot by Janette Beckman. Shout out to her. I'm going to put the different images in the video. During that time period, we got Janette Beckman to capture the group in what was seen as Busta Rhymes' first or second, I believe, official photo shoots during the time. And she went on to say this: "My philosophy has always been to let people be themselves. I don't like to pose people. I want to capture them as they are in the moment. I think that's why I have comfortable people and comfortable artists around me. We spent the day together taking pictures. It was really fun. They were all characters in their own right. Busta Rhymes was slightly larger than everyone else in the group." Is that hard to see when you look at Busta Rhymes and what he will become years on? I don't think so. The late 90s, the mid 90s, we got to see Busta Rhymes being the most animated people in rap music. That was all driven by his hair, by his wild antics. Moving forward to the mid-90s, we get to see now his hair being much more longer and becoming a brand, becoming part of his brand. All different creative styles. I'm talking about pigtails and ponytails, braiding his hair different ways. What's even more interesting is that his hair is actually a very prominent part of his image when it comes to different films. So for example, in Higher Learning, we get to see Busta Rhymes having his hair styled in such a way which is, again, exaggerating the hairstyle and exaggerating his personality. It's like he's wearing a hat, but his big lock is just sticking out of the hat. Again, this is all adding to the persona and the art and the creative mind of Busta Rhymes. This is why he's becoming so much more of a dominant and prominent figure. It is all about appearing different to your peers. When you look at the landscape of the 90s, not much reputation of that is taking place, whereas today in 2023 we have the Wicks hairstyle, which is popular in South Florida, where you have one big dreadlock that is intertwined to each other, which is sticking out. So you might have maybe 2 or 3 massive locks. That is something that's done more today, but in the 90s, not so much. When you have Busta Rhymes having all of his hair tied into one big bunch, it stands out and makes him look different, which is why we're celebrating Busta Rhymes for his different, creative, unique styles so early on in the rap game. Now, we also find this in his interviews with Your NT Raps, where he's putting his hair in pigtails. Again, there it goes back to, being criticized by David Bowie when MTV were called out. Years later, or, literally a decade later from being called out, or a few years after that, we get to see artists now being able to showcase their creative styles, and Busta Rhymes is just one of the people to do that, which is why we continue to give him his flowers. I need a breather. Why Busta Rhymes has one of the most unique dreadlocks in rap is because towards the late 90s, what he does is really interesting. We take a closer look, we get to see his head is actually shaven here. So all of the front locks here, so on my head it would probably be 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so all this is shaven off on Busta Rhymes' head, and it's done in exchange for having loose afro hair. That loose afro hair we then used to braid the front of his hair. So the first half of his head was cane row, and the second half of his hair were dreadlocks. I haven't even seen that style done today in 2023. So again, it just adds further creative uniqueness to Busta Rhymes' whole appeal. If you look at these images, he's using the video in different photo shoots and music videos. It just goes to show the appeal around Busta Rhymes' hair and why it became so much of a unique part of who he was as a person. Now, throughout this video, I've spoken about the influence of Black America throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, it has shaped hip-hop culture, we all know that. But there's a tiny, small island somewhere in the world. You might know it. It's called Jamaica.
Jamaica's in my blood. So as much as we're gonna rap hip-hop tonight, we're gonna represent this dance hall culture.
Big up all the Trinidad.
They, without a doubt, have shaped hip-hop culture. They've shaped aspects of UK cultures where I'm from, especially from grime music and different genres of music as well, but particularly in Jamaica. Now, what Busta Rhymes does really well is he takes aspects of the MC and the toast, and he takes aspects of Rastafarian culture and merges it into one. Let me explain. Early pioneers such as DJ Kool Herc took the idea of the mobile DJ, moving around, playing records and extending the break, where MCs would toast and chart over the music. That was brought over to New York City in 1973, where he played block parties and had the exact same thing, which derived from Jamaican culture. He then takes aspects of Rastafarian culture, and which is the use of dreadlock hair, it is the freedom of expression, it is connection to your African roots, all of that merged into one, which is why we get the birth of Busta Rhymes. He's taken the aspects of Jamaican culture and he's putting it all throughout his music and his visual identity and branding. Throughout his career, he's spoken about the importance of his culture and his heritage, being from Jamaica, on different interviews, different platforms, award shows, podcasts, you name it. We all know Busta Rhymes as one of the most prominent Jamaican figures to come out of the culture. Jamaica is very important to his story, and it's very important for me to elaborate on that. I mean, yes, I do love Busta Rhymes, but it's very important for me to name that the most underlining aspects here is that tiny island called Jamaica when it comes to his story. I hope I've been able to paint a full, clear picture for you in regards to how influential Busta Rhymes has been as a full-round artist. I mean, he's had one of the most iconic videos. I mean, fashion sense, his cadence, his style, his flow, but when it comes to his hair, we cannot deny the amount of influence it's had. If you ask most people today, I'm betting they would say Lil Wayne. And now, don't get me wrong, Lil Wayne has been very influential when it comes to the younger demographic, but it all starts to Busta Rhymes. Yes, there were people doing it before, rappers even doing it in the 90s, and I would say mid 80s and late 80s, but when it comes to one of the most influential acts, we have to give it to Busta Rhymes. I'm going to leave a link in the description below where you can go on our website, hardtofact.com, and look at the detailed timeline with a visual gallery so you can see just how he styled his hair. So I'm here to tell you all different hair stories because, you know, hair might be a boring, mundane topic, but I'm going to do the absolute best to make sure these stories are creative and they're fun and you learn something from it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Bakes. Peace.